against the European foe and fighting against an elite consensus amongst the British political class that withdrawal from the European Union makes about as much sense as seeking to reverse a heart transplant operation. But now his time has come. So, is he the humble leader of a people's army seeking merely to take our country back, or a dangerous demagogue at the head of another dad's army striving to stifle those who would take our country forward? And what's wrong with Romanian immigrants next door as neighbours anyway? Have you ever lived next door to British students? The next 60 minutes will help you make up your minds. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my enormous pleasure to introduce Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP.
Well, Tim, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Good morning. What an absolute joy it is to be here and to meet the travel industry. I thought that the world had become full of grey, monochrome, dull people who didn't enjoy themselves anymore. Well, I have to say that when I bailed out at 3:30 this morning, your industry was still going strong. Well done, you. I want to begin, if I can, by dispelling a myth. And one of the myths about me is, and about UKIP, is that we are anti-European. We hate Europe. We hate Europeans. We can't stand the whole thing. And that we're very insular, narrow, little Englanders who wouldn't be seen dead eating garlic. I want to make it absolutely clear that actually my European credentials are very good. It may surprise you to know that I'm actually married to a girl who was born and raised in Hamburg. All right? Woo! So nobody needs to tell me about the dangers of living in a German-dominated household. I understand these things. And in my career in business, yes, business. Yeah, believe it or not, I didn't have the same career path as virtually everybody in Westminster today. You know what I'm talking about. They all go to the same school. They all go to the same Oxford College, they all do a degree in PPE, and they all at 22 or 23 become researchers. You know, in the Labour office or the Tory office or the Lib Dem office, which will be closed this time next year, but that's another story. And they all become researchers, and they become members of Parliament aged 27 or 28, cabinet ministers in their early middle 40s, and the country is now being run by a bunch of college kids who've never done a proper day's work in their lives. I did work for 20 years. I worked in the base metals industry, working on the London Metal Exchange, the last 9 years of that running my own business. So I can actually, unlike the rest of them, say hand on heart that I worked damned hard in the private sector for 20 years up until lunchtime, every single day. It often went wrong after that, but there we are. Yeah, you know, and during that period of time, once again, to prove my European credentials, I worked for 2 French companies, all right? Okay, they both sacked me for insubordination, but I'm trying not to bear the grudge. The point is, the question is, what is Europe? You know, what is Europe, and what do we want this political construct called the European Union to be? And I want to put it to you that Europe is the most fascinating continent on the earth. Within a very, very short geography, 50 miles, 100 miles, we find different peoples, speaking different languages, with different histories, different cultures, different wines, different cheeses. You know, America's pretty boring, isn't it? Australia's pretty boring by comparison. You drive 2,000 miles, and it's a monoculture. Europe is a fantastic, amazing, and fascinating place. The problem that Europe has had is that it's been too busy fighting each other. And, you know, I completely understand why post-1945, you know, French intellectuals took the view, look, in 1870 they came, in 1914 they came, and in 1940 they came. And look at the sheer devastation that they've wreaked on our country, our continent and the world. We have to try and do something to stop this from ever happening again. And it's true that if people trade with each other, if people cooperate with each other, if people are interdependent economically with each other, they are far less likely to fight each other. Of that I think there is no doubt at all. But the central ideology behind this European project was that the existence of nation-state was what led to war, and that therefore what must be done is to abolish nation-state, to create a new supranational entity, a new United States of Europe, but to make sure that at no point on that journey did you ever come clean and tell the people that that is what you've intended. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what the European project is today. And some of you might have noticed that a couple of weeks back there were some elections, some European elections, and I was very pleased and proud that my party topped the poll in the United Kingdom. We had the results on a Sunday night, and on a Tuesday I went to Brussels and I went to a meeting, and I, believe it or not, I'm one of the presidents of the European Parliament. I mean, you couldn't really invent it, could you? But I'm one of the 7 presidents of the European Parliament, which means they have to invite me to all the high-level meetings. It really must stick in their throat, you know. So if, you know, visiting head of state comes to Brussels and there's a lunch, well, Farage is on the invitation list. And I particularly enjoyed one last year. Angela Merkel came to the European Parliament, and I accepted the invitation. So 7 of us and a couple of interpreters had lunch with the German Chancellor, and I can let you into a little secret that Angela Merkel in real life is even more miserable than she appears to be in public. So I turned up on Tuesday and I sat in this room with the leader of the European Christian Democrats, the leader of the Socialists, the leader of the Greens, and Mr. Martin Schulz, who is the President of the European Parliament, and it was absolutely clear that despite the fact varying shades of Euroscepticism, some from the hard right, as in France, some from the hard left, as in Greece, and right across the continent, Eurosceptic parties had done well, or indeed, in 7 countries, actually topped the polls, and it was absolutely clear from that meeting in Brussels that they intend to ignore the whole thing and carry on regardless. Now, I got into politics myself back in 1990, and it had been a very boring, dull day on the London Metal Exchange, and I was trading zinc at the time and losing money, and I was in an establishment called the Wine Lodge in Fenchurch Street, before mobile phones were popular, or before the pubs and bars in the city had screens with prices and news, and somebody ran in to say, we've joined the exchange rate mechanism. And for those that remember, this was the idea that we would peg sterling to effectively the Deutschmark as a precursor to Britain joining the euro. And I won't tell you what my initial reaction to that was, but suffice to say that it wasn't very polite. And it was a Conservative government, a party that I voted for, a party indeed that I've been a member of, that had taken us into this. And of course it had the full support of Labour and the Liberal Democrats. And the argument 20 years ago was that it would be a massive benefit for Britain to be in the euro, because when we went on holiday to Spain, do you remember all this? We wouldn't have to change our money. Now, I think you in this industry are intelligent enough to realise that the whole point of going on holiday is actually, it was really rather fun, wasn't it? To change your pounds up for pesetas. And frankly, when I go the 23 miles to Calais, you know, I want to meet a little Frenchman wearing a beret, smoking a gitan, and reeking of garlic. Otherwise there's no point in going, is there? You know, the whole point about travel and tourism is we go to different places for different experiences. Anyway, the British political class had signed up to the European project and wanted to take us into the euro. And I thought, you know, I can't be doing with this. I don't believe that the euro will be a success for the United Kingdom. I thought even 20 years ago, how on earth can you take the Mediterranean countries and the German motor and the Benelux countries and force them into one. So I've been a campaigner against the United States of Europe for 20 years. And I stood in my first election back in 1994 in the Eastleigh by-election, and I remember standing on the stage that night as the Lib Dems swept yet another seat from John Major's Conservatives, and I stood there shoulder to shoulder with one of the great men of post-war British politics, screaming Lord David Such, and I managed to beat him by a crushing margin of 162 votes, and I didn't come last. So that's where my career in politics started. And I campaigned all through the 1990s, and as Tim said, you know, no one was listening. No one was listening. We were ignored, we were mocked, and it all really rather reminds me when we won the election last Sunday. It reminds me of that lovely line that the late great Bob Monkhouse used to use. Bob Monkhouse said, when I was growing up, I told my friends and family that when I was older, I was going to become a comedian. And they laughed at me. Well, he said, they're not laughing now. And it's a bit like that with UKIP. I first got myself elected in 1999, and I have to say, nobody thought UKIP had a cat's chance in hell. I don't think I really thought we did. And I found myself at 1:30 in the morning staring into a TV camera for the first time in my life, saying how pleased and delighted I was to have been elected under a system I condemned to a parliament I despised. And there I was, and it was my first ever interview, and I'd never had any media training or any prepping of any kind at all. And the interviewer, he began the interview by saying congratulations, which is a hint, it wasn't the BBC, because they'd never say that. Congratulations, he said, Nigel, you've been elected to the European Parliament. He said, next week, you'll be off on Eurostar, and you'll arrive in Brussels, and on your desk, you'll find a never-ending list of invitations to lunches, to dinners, to champagne receptions. Do you think, he said, you'll become corrupted by the lifestyle? And I replied live on air, my first ever interview, and it's still the best answer I've ever given. I said, no, I've always lived like that. So off I went, and I believed in those days that Britain was a square peg in a round hole. I believed that because of our system of common law, because of our tradition of parliamentary democracy, something that we really developed and sold to much of the civilised world. But I also believed that because of our link and our relationship with 50 other countries in the world who share with us that common law culture, who share with us a common language, who in many cases are actually our own kith and kin and our bigger extended family in the world, and yes, I'm talking about the 2 billion people that live within the Commonwealth, I always felt that Europe actually was too small, too insular and too narrow for what I think should be a global trading nation of Great Britain. So I went there thinking that we shouldn't be part of this. We should have a simple free trade arrangement, very much like the common market that my mum and dad thought they were voting for back in the 70s. But I thought if the rest of Europe wants it, then that's absolutely fine by me. Well, my view on that has now changed dramatically. I very well remember in 2003 and 4, Giscard, the great Giscard d'Estaing, who was the author of the EU Constitution. It was the first time that the European project had actually decided to come clean with its citizens. It had decided to tell its citizens that this was far more than an association of countries hoping to trade and interconnect more with the Constitution. And I was there on the day when Giscard launched it, and he held the document up, and he said, with this document, the European Union will become a military and economic global superpower. So the cat was out of the bag. The difficulty was that one or two countries had to put it to a referendum, and the French voted no, and the Dutch overwhelmingly voted no. And had the Germans had a referendum, they would have voted no. And the Finns would have voted no. And the Swedes would have voted no. And the Danes would have voted no. And the Brits would have voted no. Luxembourg did vote yes, but then given that it's smaller than Croydon, I'm not sure that matters very much. And I thought to myself, as somebody who campaigned hard, particularly in France with my very poor schoolboy French, I thought, we've scored a great victory. Now the European project will begin to unravel. Now powers will start to be handed back to the member states. We've killed the project of European political union. How stupid and naive could I have been? Within a fortnight, they decided to rebrand it as the Lisbon Treaty, to push it through without surrendering a single power that had been in the proposed constitution, and they even boasted, former Italian Prime Minister D'Amato even boasted that by calling it a treaty and not a constitution, they could pass it into law without having to have any more referendums. Well, the Irish did have a referendum, given their constitution, and they of course voted no. But that wasn't good enough, and they were bullied into voting again. So since 2005, my view has not been that the United Kingdom should not be part of this political project. My view since 2005 is I want Europe to leave the European Union, because I do not believe that Europe is that flag, that anthem, that president, who without me no one's name would ever have known, a series of glass and steel structures in Luxembourg and Strasbourg and Brussels, and they say they represent Europe. Well, I don't think they do. I think they've hijacked the very word Europe, they've hijacked the very concept of Europe, and I don't believe there is any legitimate democratic support for this project that exists anywhere in the Union. And far from being a project that actually will lead to peace and harmony, there is actually a very great danger that if you take people and against their will attempt to corral them into a new state with a new identity, with a new passport, with a new police force, ultimately with a new army, that far from that giving you a Europe of peace and harmony, you're actually very much in danger of doing what we did in 1920 when we created Yugoslavia. Nobody was asked. The Serbs weren't asked. The Bosnians weren't asked. They were forced together in a new state, the idea being once they were all together, it'd be peace and harmony. And I think what we're beginning to see, partly because of this attempt to push people together politically, and also partly because of the disastrous error that is called the euro, we're now beginning to see the very kind of extreme nationalisms and neo-fascisms actually growing up in some of these Mediterranean countries, the very thing that the project sought to stop in the first place. So I think Europe is heading in a perilous and a very dangerous direction indeed. I'm pleased that the Eurosceptics have done as well as they have in these recent elections, but it's clear we don't yet have a majority in the European Parliament. We certainly don't have a majority of any kind amongst the Prime Ministers and Presidents of Europe, and this is very much unfinished business. But I do think that the one thing we will get from those results Sunday week back is that up until now, a lot of people have thought, well, whether we like this or not, it's inevitable. We're going to get a state called Europe. And I think actually, with those results the other day, inevitability has actually died. And people are now saying it's only a matter of time before the euro breaks up. And just think about Greece. Just think about what going into the euro has done to Greece. Since 2008, their economy has contracted by 27%. When the British economy in the early 1930s contracted by 16%, it led to the Jarrow marches, it led to the great calls for a welfare state and a health service. The Greek economy has contracted by 27%. And there is absolutely no prospect of any improvement at all, because the Mediterranean now is going into a downward deflationary spiral. The point will come, whether it comes politically, whether it comes through large-scale civil insurrection, I am not sure. But the point will come when Greece will break out of the euro, they will get back the drachma, they will have a massive devaluation, probably of 70 to 75%, and then you guys are all going to be quite busy, aren't you? Because Greece will become the #1 holiday destination in the world, and I've already pledged publicly that as soon as that happens, I will go to my nearest travel agent in Sevenoaks High Street and book a fortnight's holiday in Greece. So there is going to be some good news from all of this breaking up. So behind what I do, there is a genuine and serious belief that the best way for there to be peace and harmony in Europe is for Europe to be a series of independent, self-governing nation states. I certainly believe that the euro must be broken up. And as far as our country is concerned, I don't believe our future is as a European country. And it was interesting listening to the debate about Heathrow, about Gatwick, about the growth in the global airline industry. In a sense, what you heard already backs up my argument. Our future, if we're going to be an economic success, will not be linked to Europe. Europe is a diminishing and declining part of the world. It currently accounts for about 18% of global GDP. That is forecast to fall to below 10% by 2025. And here we are, the world's 6th biggest economy, and by some measures, the world's 4th or 5th richest country. And here we are, forbidden, banned from making our own trade deals and our own trade associations with other parts of the world. We can't do it. We've lost the ability to do it. It has to be done on our behalf by an unelected Brussels bureaucrat. And in a sense, this argument was really at the heart of those 2 debates that I did with Nick Clegg back in late March and early April. And I have to say, on a personal level, nobody has done more to help my political career than Nick Clegg. And I'm extremely grateful to him. But it got to the heart of it, and there was a moment in that first debate, when Cleggers was saying, you know, we're not big enough. We can't negotiate our own global trade deals on our own. We have to be part of a big club. And I turned to Nick, and I looked at him, and he resolutely didn't turn and look at me and kept staring forward. And I said, Nick, the problem is, you just don't think we're good enough, do you? You just don't think we've got the ability anymore to chart our own course in the world. And I could see that it hurt him. And I made the argument that Iceland, which has a population of 320,000, signed in March of last year its own trade deal with China. That Switzerland, with a tiny population, has more global free trade association agreements than we do as members of the European Union. And for anybody in this room that is fearful that somehow when UKIP win, you're catching up, that when UKIP win, or when UKIP's ideas win, that somehow this will, push us backwards, lead us to being a smaller economy with less business and less trade. Just think on this. The United Kingdom now is the Eurozone's biggest export market in the world. They sell us more than they sell to America. They sell us more than they sell to Japan or to China. You know, we may manufacture a few low-cost motor cars and sell them into the European market, but the last time I looked, there were lots of Mercedes and lots of Audis and lots of Volkswagens driving on British roads. You also may like to know, and I suspect 1 or 2 of you in this room contribute to this on a regular basis, that we are per capita the heaviest champagne consumers in the world. And we import 20 million bottles of champagne from France every year. They sell us far more than we sell them. We will go on trading freely with Europe, regardless whether we're members of a European Union or not. And there are some also that think, well, of course, if UKIP gets its way, there'll be barbed wire on the beach at Dover, and nobody will be allowed to come into Britain. That we're so narrow and xenophobic, and in the last few weeks they've even dared to call us racist, because we think that actually it doesn't make sense for the British passport now to be the passport of 485 million people. That's the number of people that can freely come into the United Kingdom if they choose to do so. And what we're going to fight for, and what we're going to argue for, and I think what we're going to get the support of business ultimately for, is we think it makes far more sense to have an immigration policy where we can control not just the quantity of people that come to Britain, but the quality of people that come to Britain. Right at the moment, if you're an Indian engineer, you have very little chance of getting a permit to come to Britain because we have to have the open door to all sorts of people, some good and some bad, particularly from southern and eastern Europe. And what I want us to do is to have the kind of immigration policy that the Australians have. The Australians have a points-based system. They say you've got to be under the age of 45 and you've got to have a trade or skill to bring to Australia that will benefit the country. The Australians say you can't come if you've got a life-threatening disease. The Australians say you can't come if you've got a criminal record, which is funny when you think about it.
It's true, isn't it?
Well, we lost the Ashes. I've got to get my own back somehow. and you know, John Howard, who won 4 elections on this, John Howard said, look, we don't care what colour you are, we don't care what religion you are, but we do say this to you. If you come to our country and you bring your skills, you learn our language, you integrate in our community, and you become part of our Australian dream. And that is my proposal. Cameron, Clegg and Miliband support the open door to unlimited numbers of people, regardless of skills, regardless of criminality, and the UKIP proposal is that actually we open immigration up, we judge it on a global basis, and we take the kind of people that are going to benefit our country. And these are the reasons, and these are the arguments. Despite the slagging that we got from almost the entire press, these are the reasons why we won the European elections, and these are the reasons why, whether you like UKIP or not, what happened a couple of Sundays ago was an earthquake in British politics, and things are never going to be quite the same again. And I want that, I repeat, not just for my country, but I want it for the whole of Europe too. I love Europe. It is a fantastic place. There's really nowhere else in the world that I would wish to live, and I love travelling through it, and I enjoy its cultures. But I absolutely detest this attempt to take 28 different countries and to force them all together into one. They want to harmonise us. They want to homogenise us. God help us, they even want to pasteurise us. And turn us into some new kind of European. It'll never happen. It's better that we're French and British and German and Danes and Dutch and Greek, and let's live together in our own countries. Let's run our lives in our own parliaments, and let's be friends and trade and cooperate together at a European level. That is the future for Europe, not the one that we've got now. And I promise you, I will not rest until we've killed this monster that is called European Union. Thank you very much.